What's up, everyone? Kim Becker and Cody Roark here with your MHS AMA for the Denver Broncos. Cody, I know it's been tough lately, and we do have several questions from fans coming in. Of course, make sure that you guys are following Cody Roark NFL on Twitter, and of course, Mile High Sports, because we will send out a tweet asking you all to send in your questions about the Denver Broncos. So we'll get going here first, because as we all know, there's not a lot of great things to talk about the Denver Broncos. But the first question that we have for you, Cody, is we do have actually some very interesting kind of big stuff to talk about at the end of this. So make sure that you guys stay tuned to the very end, because you'll want to stick around. But the first question is, what can the Broncos do to finally overcome the losing culture and everything that comes with it?
Well, I mean, there's so many different things I think that have to go right in order to kind of transform this, right? I mean, you can look at this Broncos team right now and say, yes, like their culture since 2000 and ideally 2017, because in 2016 they had a winning season. They went 9-7, still missed the playoffs. That was a year where the AFC West was really loaded and each team was doing relatively well. In order to change the culture, you have to start winning, and you have to start piling. You have to stack it. As cliche as that may sound, you can't just win one game and then go 2 weeks losing games and expect to have a winning culture. Like, obviously the NFL, it's any given Sunday every single week. Anything can happen. Heck, the Jacksonville Jaguars beat the Baltimore Ravens last week. That's how crazy the NFL is. However, Denver has been under this dark cloud of losing since the 2017 season. It's just been loss after loss after loss, losing seasons, poor performances, quarterback carousels, you name it. And it's a little bit more of the same now here in 2022. And I think what's worse is the expectations for this team coming into the season were massively, a mile high at this point. And unfortunately, the expectations versus reality don't match up in any way, shape, or form for this team. So I think ultimately you have to commit to certain things, right? And look, the one thing we've seen since 2016, the Broncos have constantly fired coaches, coordinators, traded players. It went through a wide variety of different quarterbacks. There's so much change and just rotation in this organization. You can't establish a winning culture if that's what you're doing. If you're making changes every year or every 2 years, you're never going to find your footing. And that, I think, has been the issue for the Broncos. And it looks like you're going to see that here once again, because the expectation is that Nathaniel Hackett probably is going to be one and done this season after the year finishes up for Denver, which then puts them in the search for their next head coach as well, if that does happen. So hard to build a culture and a winning culture when you're constantly changing things and you're not allowing things to kind of process and grow. As frustrated as Broncos fans are, Kim, about the back-to-back losing seasons that this team has had, you can't group everything in one. But it is tiresome. It is frustrating that collectively Denver has not won in quite some time.
It gets tricky, though, because obviously looking at the current situation that the Denver Broncos are in, do you think it's better to keep Nathaniel Hackett and not go back to that inconsistency trend that has been happening the last few years?
That's a great question. For me, like I've been on the record saying, I think Nathaniel Hackett is a fantastic coach. I know a lot of Broncos fans won't agree, but I can tell you this, talking to players in the locker room, Kim, players love Nathaniel Hackett. Unfortunately, like the results haven't panned out in terms of the win-losses, but they love Nathaniel Hackett as a coach. They love him as a human being. He cares about them. That's something they never felt with Vic Fangio. So this is the tough dilemma of the NFL, right? You mentioned that, well, if you make a change, you fire Hackett, you're going to have another head coach. I think Nathaniel Hackett's biggest downfall in this situation with the pairing with Russell Wilson is I don't think Nathaniel Hackett has the personality to check Russell Wilson, right? Because as we've seen, there's been some various reports that have been coming out the last week, and we'll address something here in a little bit here on this AMA. But Russell Wilson, you need to find a coach that can check him and call him out on certain things. And it just seems like there is no power in that relationship between them two. It seems like Russell Wilson has all the power and all the pull. And granted, he just received a massive contract extension that ties him to Denver for quite some time. He's got more guarantees than Nathaniel Hackett does, which I think is a bad part of that dynamic in terms of that relationship.
Yeah, well, like you said, we'll get to kind of a bomb here at the end of this AMA, but talking about head coaches, we've got another question from another fan. Do you think George Paton would consider Dan Quinn for head coach if they do, in fact, move on from Hackett?
Well, this is a great question. Dan Quinn, what he's been able to do with the Dallas Cowboys has been fantastic. Defensively, he's got those guys playing with a high motor. He's a great leader. He was in the process. He was in consideration last year. He did have an interview with the Denver Broncos. Part of me is wondering as well. You have to imagine, like, dude, does Jerry Jones want to keep him? What does Dan Quinn want to do? Like, Dan Quinn had some opportunities to be a head coach. He decided to stay in Dallas to be a coordinator. So part of me is wondering, like, he could be a guy, but is he going to be the personality that is willing to check a guy like Russell Wilson, who does have a big brand? He has a lot of presence and a lot of celebrity backing behind him. I think ultimately, regardless of who could be potentially the next coach, if they do fire Hackett, the next coach needs to have an alpha dog mentality that says, Russ, this is what's best for the team, not what's best for number 3. I think that needs to be the approach that we see going forward.
Oh, that just like irks me inside when you say that Russell Wilson has this brand and the head coach has to be able to check this guy with celebrity backing. Like, what are we talking about? I mean, don't get me wrong. I know the NFL is just entertainment and it's a business, but that just like makes me so angry hearing you say that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. And Mike Kliss, our good friend, put out a tweet, says there's been some gossip about Russell Wilson standing in the locker room. Here's some context per source. His wife, Sierra, threw him a birthday party last night, and it looked like about half the team was there on a player's day off.
Wow.
Well, I mean, we'll see. Like, here's the deal, and I think this gets lost in everything as well. People think Russell Wilson's just this bad. He's not a bad dude. He's a great human being. Like, the things that he does for people in the community, especially for people in the children's hospital, various hospitals, like he goes and he visits people who simply can't live outside of a hospital, and he does a lot of great work in the community. I think a lot of people are just, the frustration is that Denver's losing, right? They made this massive investment in him. Denver is losing games. It's not working out, and those things right there. And I think people are just tired of like the cliche press conferences, but this is football. This is the unfortunate nature of the game. Nobody expected Kim. Nobody, not you, not me, not anybody had a magic 8 ball that said that the Broncos season would go the way it has this year. But there certainly are some tough decisions that they'll have to make this offseason. I think there's going to be a lot of change in Dove Valley. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, well, we'll kind of stay on the same trend here and move on to the next question. Does Russell Wilson engage with the team? Is he a leader and a motivator, Cody?
This is a great question. I think that for Russ, he's got the leadership aspect to him. There's something we're going to talk about coming up here in a minute, but there was a show with Tom Pelissero, Mike Garafolo called The Insiders. It's a podcast that they do. Russ in Seattle, when he was there, and it never really was his locker room. It never was his team. It was always Richard Sherman's locker room. It was Marshawn Lynch's. And then when those guys were no longer on the team, they do a great point of pointing out that Russ kind of assumed the mantle of that responsibility, because you had a lot of young guys on that Seattle team. They're like, oh, hey, this is Russell Wilson. Like, he's on there's pictures of him on all the walls here in the team facility. So Russ kind of became that leader after those guys departed. But for him, he's a new guy coming into this Denver Broncos team that already has established, solidified leaders. And when you're the new guy and your message is kind of falling on deaf ears, like you're saying these things, but things are going the opposite, it's hard for people to sit down and be like, I can't take you seriously. Yeah. I think that is kind of maybe where we're at a little bit with this whole Broncos Russell Wilson situation.
Okay, well, Cody, I'm sure you've addressed this a bunch of times since last week's game, but you and I haven't talked about it. The whole altercation or whatever it was with Purcell out there. Do you think that really stemmed from frustrations on Purcell's part with Russell Wilson? I know, of course, Russell Wilson came out afterwards and said, we're good. We're on the same page. We were just both frustrated, but we're all good. Do you believe that?
I think, yeah, because after that whole thing happened, we were in the press box. We were seeing things on social media like, oh, there was a spat. Like, what happened? We saw the video. I got the binoculars. I'm looking during a special teams play. I see Russ and Purcell. They're on the sideline, helmets off. They're talking. I think in the moment, like, yeah, it's football. It's a highly emotional game. Sure. There's going to be frustration at times. I don't think there's any like bad blood or hard feelings. It's just that these guys, especially guys like Mike Purcell, who's been around, he's been a veteran in the NFL for quite some time. And this defense, a majority of the season has carried the water of this team. And granted, the last 2 weeks they have struggled. They have not upheld their end of the bargain the last 2 weeks themselves. But this is where like the war of attrition is finally setting in. They're getting worn down and they're just getting frustrated because literally every week, Kim, it is a copy paste of the same result that we've been seeing.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you said, maybe the last couple of weeks, the defense hasn't performed to their ability in the beginning of the season. But guess what? The offense hasn't performed to any standard, it seems, throughout the entire season. So yes, this defense cannot carry the whole team. That's not fair. That's not how this sport works. But okay, well, good to know that you did see them chatting afterwards, because of course we see such small, little clips on social media and everybody freaks out. So wanted to hear that from you. But okay, we'll talk about this last subject here. You kind of mentioned it, Tom Pelissero and Mike Garofalo's report on their show about Russell Wilson and how he's viewed by players in the locker room. There's been some speculation here. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so the insiders, Mike Garofalo, Tom Pelissero, two of the most plugged-in sources around the National Football League. And you can make the argument like Tom Pelissero probably has the closest ties to Broncos GM George Paton out of anybody in this situation. And they were talking on their show on the Insiders. It's available on YouTube. You can check it out. But they were talking about how a lot of players and other people in the organization, when Russ was doing all this stuff in the offseason, Let's Ride and all the other stuff that's going on with the brand, Team 3, things like that, a lot of side, they noted it as there were a lot of side eyes by players in the locker room. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's been some rumblings that maybe Russ is trying to get Nathaniel Hackett out. Obviously the two don't mesh well together. How much can we read into that? Where's the validity in that? I think, right now it's kind of in the middle. I mean, we can maybe try to find it, but the reality of the situation is the offense has been historically bad, considering they were pretty bad last year. They were, Hackett was brought in to do this, but there was also some other criticism coming out about Russell Wilson having his own office at the team headquarters there. And I think that when you look at that, you have your own office. There's been rumblings. There's been some players that have discussed that, Russ isn't always necessarily in the locker room. He's usually in his office. So it's like, how can you build, camaraderie? How can these guys look to you for leadership if you're seldom in the locker room? Now, granted, when we have open locker rooms, Kim, Russ is in there from time to time. We see him quite a bit. There's times where he's getting treatment. So how true are these things? I'm not entirely sure. But if Mike Garofalo, Tom Pelissero have some information, I've been talking to people that have been suggesting that there is probably some rumor. There's probably some rumblings and truth to it at this point in time. But I will make note of this, Kim. When Russell Wilson signed his contract extension with the Broncos, we all were there. We were all at the team auditorium for his press conference. It's worth noting now, knowing what we know and seeing how the season's gone, I remember there was not a single teammate there for his contract extension. So how much do we look into that? Like, this is the new guy that just came in. Obviously, he's a quarterback. He's got a lot of respect, but he just got the contract extension. And it was interesting that we didn't see a single teammate there. To me, I think that is something we could read into now at this point in time.
It's funny because I won't reveal who told me this, but before the season started, I was so excited about Russell Wilson. And I was talking to one of my friends who does have some connections with the Seahawks. And he was like, be careful. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, you probably shouldn't be that excited because I know some people who know him very well. And he is not all he's cracked up to be. And he doesn't treat like the common folk, I guess I would say, with the respect that they probably deserve. And I was like, whatever, I don't believe you, this and that. But now hearing all these other things, I'm like, oh no, maybe he was right.
Well, and I'll say this too, like Russ has been good to me. Like there's times I've seen him in the locker room. He's come up, he's given me a fist bump. We've talked for a brief moment, but it's nothing like, hey, keep grinding, keep plugging away. Like those conversations there, like outside of that, all this stuff is just so weird because, Kim, we never imagined that this Broncos season would go this way. Exactly. And now these storylines that are now coming out, like it's very concerning, I think, if you're a Broncos fan, hearing some of these things. And we'll see. George Paton, in my opinion, is going to have to he's going to have a State of the Union address after the season after it ends. I'm very curious to see what happens. And obviously this week, I think with some of these reports coming out, Russ will meet, on Wednesday at the podium in Dove Valley. I imagine we'll hear him ask a question about that, and Nathaniel Hackett asked a question about some of this stuff as well. We will see how things kind of pan out here.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what you said earlier. I also agree with you that I think Russell Wilson is a great guy. The things that he does for the community and for people in need is incredible, and that's such a huge part of being such an icon in the NFL. But like you said, for where our expectations were ahead of this season and looking at it now, it just is so defeating. It's exhausting because it's like, what is the answer? I think, like you said, Denver Broncos fans are so frustrated because what is the answer? Like, no one knows what it is. Yes, Nathaniel Hackett is a great guy. He's probably a great coach. Maybe Russell Wilson is not the guy for him to help, but there's also a lot of other people on this team, a lot of other players on offense and on defense, and you don't really hear them coming out and saying, no, stop saying this about Russell, whatever. So that's also just interesting. So I don't know. There's just like so many questions surrounding this entire situation, and it's exhausting. I know you feel the same way, Cody.
Yeah, it's very draining. Like I'm sick right now. I'm not going to be able to make it to the Baltimore game this week. Like I said, I popped positive for COVID, so I'm not going to be able to make it. I'm not even be able to be at practice this week. So it's like, of course, when all this stuff comes out, I'm not able to be there, which is unfortunate. But this is definitely it is a draining season. And I just know this too, like talking to players, they're so disappointed in how the
Oh,
season
yeah.
has gone.
I'm
I think
sure.
that there's a perception. We've seen a lot of comments specifically on Facebook. A lot of Broncos fans say, "Oh, these guys don't care." Like I could tell you that's not true. These guys care
Okay.
so much. You could hear a pin drop in the locker room after a loss. Like these guys do care, and it's like when we go up to ask them a question, we're asking them the same question because that's been the same reality week in and week out. It's tiring them for both parties, and it stinks. Hopefully, better days ahead here in Broncos country, Kim.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I have heard several people that in my family and my friends as well just saying it looks like they don't care because they have nothing to play for the rest of the season. When you see them, on the TV, it just looks like they aren't trying. They look uncomfortable. They look slow. So it's nice to hear that you actually are so close to the team and you do know that these guys still really care a lot because it does kind of come across that they know their season is, in the what, and they don't care anymore. That's how it looks really on TV.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair thing to see, but it's like, these guys, I think it's great that there's a rule that there's like a 10-minute cool down period before you get to go in the locker room after a game, because it's just like when you come off the field, and I remember this just from experience, you come off the field after a loss, you feel everything like disappointment, anger, frustration, missed opportunity. And it's just like those 10 minutes you get to kind of express everything, let it out, scream, yell, whatever it may be. This is just, for so many guys on this team, great leaders as well. They're like, man, this is not what we had hoped for. And he's like, I sound, you guys like Justin Simmons saying, I sound like a broken record because I'm saying the same thing every week. He's like, but this isn't a good feeling. Like this stinks. Like we did not expect this and we got to play better. And, think about Justin. He's always accountable. And he says something along the lines of, it doesn't matter what our defensive ranking is. We're not making enough plays to win games. And that's true accountability. And I think we all want to see more of that from the offensive side of the ball.
Absolutely. We want to see a lot of things from the offensive side of the ball, but I totally get it, Cody, and I respect what you think here about this team and what's going on. It's great for us to hear because we don't get to be around the team as close as you do. I hope that you feel better, though. I'm sorry you won't be able to make this weekend's game. I mean, I'd love to say I hope that the Denver Broncos can upset and have this fantastic win, but I don't know if that will happen.
Yeah, let's see. Like if it happens, great. I'll feel a lot better about everything. Because when the team's winning, like it's great because fans are happy, even if it's like a win for a week.
Sure,
and it's back to the same old stuff. Like
absolutely.
I like it when Broncos country's happy. It makes me a little bit more happy too.
Wins fix everything. We do know that. But thank you everybody so much for tuning in to this MHS Broncos AMA. I am Kim Becker. He is Cody Roark. Make sure that you are following Cody and Mile High Sports on Twitter so that you can send in your questions weekly before we do this AMA. Cody, I hope you feel better. I hope you have a great week and go Broncos.